Diane Abbott says she's been hoofed out of the Labour Party after 37 years as an MP. She's famous for race baiting, saying that Jews and redheads have historically faced the same oppression, and getting her shoes on the wrong feet. But with Keir Starmer now saying she hasn't been kicked out of the Labour Party, has she got off on the wrong foot again? Well, whether she's in or out, she's a total liability. Let's have a look at some of her greatest moments. Here she is explaining how she'd fund new police people.
What we've said is we would find the money to recruit the 10,000 police people by we would find the money because we'd look at capital gains tax. The Tories have cut capital gains tax and we want to restore it. And that would give us, I think, 170... We would find the money by restoring levels of capital gains tax. We think that by restoring the cuts in capital gains tax, that would find us another £300 million a year.
We're going to get 11 gazillion police peoples, and we'll pay for it by cutting tax. Well, if she is pushed out of politics, at least she can become an accountant for the SNP.
And do you know the number of net losses so far for Labour?
At the time of us doing this interview, I think the net losses are about 50.
There are actually 125 net losses so far.
Well, the last time I looked, we had net losses of 100.
And if numbers aren't her greatest strength, neither is patriotism. In 1984, she publicly backed the IRA, saying, "Every defeat of the British state is a victory for all of us," which makes her sound more like a member of parliament in Iran than in Britain. She also said that the unionist population of Northern Ireland was an enclave of white supremacist ideology comparable to white settlers in Zimbabwe, by which she presumably meant that unionists could run a farm and maintain a functioning economy. Still, the fact that they're settlers must have come as a shock to Northern Irish people whose ancestors were born on the same land going back centuries. She also refused to vote to ban Al-Qaida. Here's her justification for that.
Shortly before 9/11, you voted against prescribing Al-Qaida as an organisation. That was a huge mistake on your part, was it not?
Have you actually read the legislation we were voting on?
I have read the legislation and I've looked at the addendums as well.
And
I've got here.
What the legislation brought forward was a whole list of organisations, some of which some people would argue were not terrorist organisations, but dissident organisations. Well, and to say that because...
Okay. Which ones? Because I've got the list here. Al-Qaida, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, the Armed Islamic Group, Harakat Mujahideen, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Group, Islamic Army of Aden, the Abu Nidal organisation, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Which of these should not be prescribed?
The titles are one thing, but the reality of some of those groups, whether they were dissidents in their country of origin, and that's why some of us were not willing. Had they taken out Al-Qaida as one thing, that would have been something. But, you know,
this is a group of really dangerous organisations from all around the world, many of whom have killed a lot of people. Lashkar-e-Taiba carried out the 2008 Mumbai attacks, which killed more than 170 people. That was on the list. This was, you know, no list is perfect, but it was a pretty good list, and you voted against prescribing those groups.
Because there were groups on that list which I deem to be dissidents rather than terror organisations. You have to give people credit for thinking about how they vote.
Well, there is the list. Which of those organisations do you think should not have been prescribed? Because, you know, you voted against the whole lot being prescribed because presumably some of them you thought were OK. I'm just wondering which ones you think are OK.
It's not that I thought they were OK. I thought that they were dissident organisations.
You can have the list if you'd like it.
No, I don't read it, Andrew.
Just to give you an idea of the standard of left-wing politics in the UK, she was Shadow Home Secretary for 4 years, so if Labour had been elected, she'd have held one of the most important political positions in the country, responsible for the country's safety and security, even though she's got a history of siding with terrorist groups who want to destroy Britain, and is also clearly thick as pig shit, with an inability to do basic maths or read very important reports about terrorism in the UK.
I revisited, as I'm sure you have recently, the Lord Harris inquiry, the recommendations that he made to Sadiq Khan about preparedness in London for a terror attack. Do you think some of the things he said in there were prescient and should be acted on? They haven't been acted on yet.
I think we do need to revisit that report because, and we do need
Which part of it?
Well, I just think it's about preparedness and resilience.
But he made some very specific recommendations that haven't been acted on. Do you know what they are?
Well, I know, I mean, he was talking about preparedness and resilience, and I do think that we need to act not necessarily on every specific recommendation.
But you remember the report came out only in October 2016. The mayor, the newly elected mayor, commissioned it. It came out in October 2016, and Lord Toby Harris had some bullet points. You know, that's what I've read through. I mean, what did you make of those? The specifics?
I thought, because I know Toby Harris, he's a very
long-standing
London
very thorough-blown
politician.
inquiry, I must say, and review.
I thought it was an important review, and I think we should act on it, but obviously working with stakeholders.
But what should we act on? I mean, you know, what do you think of the recommendations about the various police forces in London?
You mean the idea that they should work more closely together?
Well, he suggested they should amalgamate.
Well, I think that's an interesting idea, but I think you'd find resistance in some parts of London to the amalgamation.
Have you actually read the report?
I have.
Okay, what about when you talk about, what about the physical resilience? Again, I'm referring to this because it seemed prescient.
Yes, I mean, I think physical resilience is important. I think that...
But there was a specific aspect of physical resilience.
Well, I think that physical resilience is important.
Yes, well, I mean, but the specific aspect was he talked about putting up more barriers in the light of the Nice attacks. He mentioned that in October 2016.
Yes, we're now putting up barriers on bridges.
How did somebody so lamentable rise to such heady heights in Corbyn's shadow cabinet? Well, she was shagging the boss. In the 1970s, she went on a motorbike tour of communist East Germany with Jeremy Corbyn, a rare moment of people escaping freedom to get to a communist country. She also went on a romantic camping trip with Jeremy Corbyn to France with him for what's described as a fling, but what I describe as the worst smell imaginable. And she indulges in race baiting at every possible opportunity, such as when she said that Sasha Johnson, a Black Lives Matter activist who was shot in the head at a party, was targeted because she stood up for racial justice. It later transpired that the men who shot her weren't white supremacists, but were in fact a group of black men. She even moaned that the Labour Party is too racist for her. Diane was suspended from the Labour Party after writing a piece in the Observer newspaper, which is what the Guardians called it at the weekends, claiming that Irish, Jewish and traveller people had never suffered racism, but had experienced prejudice instead. And she said that this was like the prejudice suffered by redheads, because we can all remember the chapter in Mein Kampf about gingers not having souls, and the Nazi extermination camps for redheads. While this might be the ostensible reason for booting her out of the Labour Party, the real reason was that she's one of the old guard Corbynite momentum people and a complete liability. A plank with a face drawn on it would be a more competent politician. And like every prominent leftist, she's a hypocrite. She railed against privilege and criticised other politicians for sending their kids to selective schools, but went one up and took her 11-year-old son James out of the state education system and sent him to private school, a fee-paying school. She justified this saying, "I'd done a lot of work on how black boys underachieve in secondary school, so I knew what a serious problem it was. I knew what could happen to my son if he was sent to the wrong school and got in with the wrong crowd." So Diane was saying that she didn't want her son to mix with working class black kids because they're the wrong crowd? Well, it didn't work. Like a salmon lured to its spawning ground by some dormant instinct, her son, James Abbott, was lured to drugs and gangs anyway, getting into all kinds of japes and scrapes with the law, and finally being sectioned after reportedly having crystal meth delivered to his mum's £1.2 million home and chasing her with scissors, claiming to have a gun in his dressing gown pocket. I mean, surely if he had a gun, it would make more sense to chase her with the gun and say he had scissors in the pocket. He went on a drug-induced rampage, and when police turned up, he accused them of raping him, bit an officer and tried to escape from an ambulance. Then went on a rampage across various London hospitals, beating up 2 nurses, a doctor, a therapist and 5 police officers. According to the Daily Mail, on another occasion he smashed a female nurse's glasses, saying, "Bitch, you think you were white? You want some of this?" Another doctor was doused with a bowl of hot custard, and later a canteen tray was used to hit a female therapist. Anyway, in Britain, running with scissors is illegal without a licence, and so is smoking crystal meth and attacking nurses. So he is charged and pleaded guilty to 12 assaults, racially aggravated criminal damage, making threats, and exposing himself, a selection of crimes known in the business as a P. Diddy. Diane didn't just give her son a leg up by sending him to private school, he also floated into a job as a diplomat for the Foreign Office. Now, when I worked at the Foreign Office, it seemed like a very prestigious place to be a diplomat. Little did I know that all you needed for the top job was a crack pipe, a dream, and an influential mother. Diane attempted to excuse her nepotism, saying, "I'm a West Indian mum, and West Indian mums will go to the wall for their children." Well, guess what, Diane? We all love our own kids and will do anything for them. Everyone's a Tory, really. Socialists always want socialism for other people, but act like Tories when it's their own money and their own kids. Anyway, Keir Starmer says she hasn't been kicked out of the Labour Party. Did she just get hold of the wrong end of the stick, or did Keir, who sticks to his convictions with all of the rigidity of a windsock, flip-flop when he realised that booting her out would be unpopular with the communists, race baiters and mouth breathers who make up the base of any socialist party? Well, who knows? All I can promise is, as much as Keir pretends to be a competent centrist, these forces are going to come out and make the Labour government a complete clown show, and I can't wait for it. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you want to buy me a pint, there are links below, and you can support me making these videos by becoming a patron. You get special patron-only content. Coming up, I've got an interview with a global finance guru who's going to explain how government debt works and how it's driving mass migration, war and systemic collapse. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye. Bye-bye.